There's something incredibly satisfying about a well-done trilogy of books, not a never-ending mega series where you forget half the plot by book 7. I'm talking about a tight 3-book arc, a beginning, middle, and end. You get some character growth, the world expands, but then it has this satisfying payoff at the end where everything just wraps up. Today, I'm counting down my 10 favorite fantasy trilogies. These are trilogies that have incredible characters that I love, world building, clever plot twists, but then it all wraps up with a satisfying ending. Some of these are going to be classics, some of them are going to be underrated, others are going to be trilogies that you've probably seen recommended time and time again, but that's for a reason. And at the end of the day, I'm not saying these are the best trilogies of all time. These are just my personal favorites, and it was hard to narrow it down to just 10, so I am gonna have a lot of honorable mentions as well. And while we're talking about things that stick the landing, this video is sponsored by INTOTHEAM, makers of seriously comfortable and high quality clothing. Honestly, they have some of the coolest designs I've ever seen. Whether I'm filming, reading, or editing for hours on end, their hoodies, sweatshirts, Henleys, and graphic tees, they've become my go-to in my wardrobe, and you've likely seen me wearing their clothing in a lot of videos this year. I'm actually wearing all INTOTHEAM right now. I have on a pair of their sweatpants, I'm wearing this sweater, and this is a new jacket they sent me, which I love. This is like my new favorite jacket, and they also sent me this green flannel jacket this time, which I really like as well, and it's perfect for the winter. Right now is actually the best time to check them out because it's their massive Black Friday and Cyber Monday sale, which is the biggest sale they have of the year. You can get up to 60% off your order using my link in the description and an additional 10% off using my coupon code. That is massive savings, and their clothing is like legit high quality. I wear it all the time. You're not gonna want to miss out. If you're looking for comfy reading clothes or you just want a great easy gift idea for a special person in your life, their stuff is honestly perfect. You got great quality, really unique designs, and the clothing doesn't feel like cheap fashion that's gonna fall apart in a month or two. Their clothing is meant to last. Click the link below, use my code, and don't wait too long because this sale only comes around once a year. Huge thank you to INTOTHEAM for sponsoring the video. Now, getting into my top 10 trilogies that I have read, I'm gonna start off with a bunch of honorable mentions. Some of these, it's just been a long time since I read them, and I don't quite know where I would rank them, so I do want to include some honorable mentions here. My first honorable mention goes to the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. I'm assuming this is probably on a lot of people's top 10 lists. I feel like this one got maybe a little overhyped for me just online on BookTube. A lot of people recommend this book, and I did really enjoy the first one. I didn't think it was like as amazing as people say, but maybe by the third book, I'll be singing this series' praises. So I am excited to continue reading this series, and maybe next year this one will make it into my top 10. The Winter Night Trilogy by Catherine Arden. This is such a beautiful, captivating series. I read the first book years and years ago, and then I took a huge break in between when I started the second book, and I just never went back and finished the third book. I really need to do that at some point, but I'm probably just going to end up rereading both of these before moving on to book 3 because it's been too long now. Catherine Arden really does such a great job at pulling you in to this freezing cold Russian wilderness, and like the atmosphere of these books is just so intense, and the folklore and history just adds this kind of whimsical element to the series. I really do gotta go back and finish this trilogy. And then this next honorable mention, man, this one really takes me back, and maybe I feel bad for not putting this in my top 10 because it just means a lot to me, and that is the original Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn. This is one of the best Star Wars books that has ever existed, and you're gonna find a lot of varying quality when it comes to Star Wars books. There's some real stinkers in there, but then there's some masterpieces like this trilogy. When the original movies ended with Return of the Jedi, there was a lot of talk about sequels and prequels, but at the time it seemed like George Lucas wasn't really interested in doing anything else for a while. All hope seemed lost until Timothy Zahn stepped in and wrote Heir to the Empire. He really tapped into the then underdeveloped history before Episode 4, touching on elements of the Old Republic and the Clone Wars and the fall of the Jedi. This is the 20th anniversary edition that includes a novella and some annotations. They've reprinted the books a lot since then. I still have my original copy somewhere. These are some of the reprints that Disney made when this became the Legends, Star Wars Legends series. So officially, this is not canon anymore, but it should be. This should have been the sequel trilogy. Disney's version is fan fiction. I'm gonna stand on that hill, and I really wish that this is what we got for the sequels. If you're interested in seeing what the Star Wars sequels should have been, then I highly recommend checking out the original Thrawn trilogy. There is a new Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn as well, that's like officially in the canon of Disney, and that one is actually pretty good, but still not as good as the original. Honestly, they're some of the best audiobooks I've listened to as well. There's voice acting and sound effects and music. They're fantastic. If I convinced one person to check out the original Thrawn trilogy, starting with Heir to the Empire, then this video is a success. Let me know in the comments if I convinced you to read it. I hope I did. The Powder Mage trilogy by Brian McClellan. This is book 2, I believe. I don't have book 1, but Powder Mage is a fantastic series. It's kind of like flintlock fantasy set in this Napoleonic revolutionary era, and it is very unique. If you want to read about people snorting gunpowder for magical abilities, this is the series for you. It's the only book series where I've read about that, and it's awesome. This next one is very, very special to me. Again, it's one that I kind of wish I could include in the top 10, but it just got knocked down a bit. That is the Dark Elf Trilogy by R.A. Salvatore. This is the beginning of the Legend of Drizzt series, which is this huge spanning series set in the Dungeons and Dragons, the Forgotten Realms. And this was the very first, like, adult fantasy that I read after Lord of the Rings growing up, and it is kind of why I fell in love with fantasy. I credit Deltora Quest by Emily Rada and the Legend of Drizzt series by R.A. Salvatore as the books that made me the fantasy reader I am today, and I might not have made my channel if it weren't for these books. And honestly, this series means so much to me. This is my original copy of the Dark Elf Trilogy. I got this bind up of it, and the Dark Elf Trilogy, if you don't know, this is the origin story of Drizzt Do'Urden, the iconic drow elf hunter, and his animal companion, Guinevere. He's basically a legend in the Dungeons and Dragons mythology. And again, this series means so much to me. I read it at the perfect time growing up, where you can really relate with this character who doesn't quite fit in, and he's trying to find himself, he's making friends, he's working his way through some trauma, and it is such a relatable character. Some of the internal dialogue that Drizzt shares is really relatable, and I think he's a fantastic fantasy character. He's one of my favorites, and yes, the series does become a little long-running over time. I don't even know how many Legend of Drizzt books there are now. I haven't read all of them, but there's something incredibly comforting about going back into this world, back to this character that is someone you've gone on so many adventures with. And honestly, it still holds up. I reread this Dark Elf trilogy, and I still love it. I still love it just as much as when I read it when I was younger. I think it's an incredible series. Now, it doesn't necessarily have that satisfying payoff that I was looking for in making this top 10 list, because while this is a trilogy, this is his origin story. After you finish the Dark Elf trilogy, you then move on to the Icewind Dale trilogy that starts off with the Crystal Shard. You got Streams of Silver in there. I don't have a copy of that. And the Halfling's Gem. I love these covers. I really love all the cover art on the Drizzt books. And the Icewind Dale trilogy just really expands this universe even more. You get to meet some of the iconic characters like Wolfgar and Catti-brie, Regis the Halfling, and Artemis Entreri, who's kind of the rival of Drizzt. And I'm someone who never played Dungeons and Dragons. I've always wanted to, but I never have. And still, you can enjoy these books without having read Dungeons and Dragons. When I finally played the Baldur's Gate video games, I played the first one and then the third one. I don't know why I skipped the second, but those games were even more special to me because of my experiences reading these books. I then got to see that world actually come to life, having never played Dungeons and Dragons. I've probably been rambling on about these books for too long now. That's just because they're very special to me. The next honorable mention goes to the Night Angel trilogy by Brent Weeks. I'm really going hard on the nostalgia this time. This was the next series that I read after The Legend of Drizzt. I probably read these a little too young, I guess, because there is some incredibly dark moments in this series. I still love these books. Are they perfect? Absolutely not. Going back and reading them now, I still think they're very good. They're great assassin fantasy. But Brent Weeks, you know, is he the best at writing female characters? No. Do these books feel kind of melodramatic at times? Yes. Do I still love them regardless? Also, yes, these books are just so much fun. They're one of the reasons why I still love the assassin rogue archetype when it comes to characters. And for a long time, when I was younger, after reading these books, whenever I played a video game, I would always choose the rogue or the assassin because of these books. And yes, I would probably name them Durzo Blint or something like that. I never did like these covers though, that have like an actual person on them in a Halloween outfit. But looking back at them now, they're kind of nostalgic to me, which is why I still like to keep them on my shelf. If you're looking for an assassin fantasy, this is what you should read. The 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. This is a trilogy I think is very important. It does something entirely different. I haven't read much like this book. I love the world building. I love how she subverts so many different tropes. However, I didn't feel as attached to some of the characters in this series, and also I didn't feel like the second and third book were as good as this first one, and that's why it didn't quite make it into my top 10. The Cold Fire trilogy by C.S. Friedman. These have some of the coolest covers I have ever seen. This has absolutely one of the best villains that I love to hate. I picked these books up at a used bookstore just kind of on a whim because of the covers, and I was so surprised with the quality here. This is such a fascinating, complex world, and just idea that this author had, how this planet that humans came to colonize is kind of, it can feed on your human thoughts and emotions and your nightmares. It can bring your nightmares to life, and it is such a great underrated gem. Highly recommend the Cold Fire trilogy. Okay, finally moving on to my top 10. At number 10, we have the Riddle Master of Head trilogy by Patricia A. McKillop. This is a classic. Despite the fact that these came out nearly 50 years ago, they still hold up incredibly well. Are you going to be confused reading them? Yes, you have to enjoy some of the ambiguity when it comes to McKillop. She's not an author that writes in pure clarity. There's a lot of mystery to this series, but something that I love about the Riddlemaster books, this is like the essence of fantasy. It's very whimsical and mysterious, and it makes me feel like I'm reading something that is from a different world. It feels like she's writing this for someone in this world. It's really a shame that these are not nearly as talked about as much as they should be anymore, and we should probably have like a beautiful bind-up edition of these. Basically, this is the story of Prince Morgan from the Island of Head, and this prince won a riddle game with a ghost, and he's on a journey to meet his new bride. But then his ship is attacked and sunk by mysterious shape changers that are after him, and he's drawn into a cruel game where the stakes are are the fate of the world. This has a lot of mystery to it and forgotten lore and mysterious magic. What really makes this stand out is the atmosphere. McKillop is a beautiful writer. It's very poetic and dreamlike, but it doesn't feel pretentious. It is just genuinely gorgeous writing. There's not really another author like McKillop. The way that she writes makes this truly feel like fantasy, where you just have that sense of wonder. This is kind of an ultimate comfort read for me. The descriptions of the crunch of snow and the howling wind as he's exploring the wilderness, truly some of the most atmospheric writing. McKillop is one of the best fantasy authors out there, in my opinion, but also just objectively. And yeah, her writing does take a little getting used to. Once you do, it's so beautiful. And then we have the Gormenghast trilogy by Mervyn Peake. I may not be writing the trilogy of books I'm writing right now if it weren't for Gormenghast, because when I first read this series years and years ago, I had this idea come to me about this really atmospheric setting, and now that I'm finally deep in writing my trilogy, I have so much to thank for Gormenghast giving me that initial spark of inspiration. And not only that, this is still just an incredible series that I love so much, and it's such a weird trilogy. The oddest books that I've read. If you don't know about Gormenghast, this is a dark, baroque, coming-of-age saga that is set in one of the strangest castles in fantasy. This crumbling, labyrinthine, mega structure that is ruled by ritual and tradition. The story begins in Titus Grown, where the main protagonist of the series is just born. He's just a baby through the entire first book. Titus is heir to the ancient house of Grown. Around him sprawls Gormenghast Castle, endless corridors, moss-choked rooftops, kitchens the size of villages, and a ruling family is suffocating under centuries of pointless ceremony. While Titus grows up surrounded by lonely eccentrics, another force rises in the shadows. Steerpike, a clever, ruthless kitchen boy, decides to claw his way to power, no matter who he has to betray or burn along the way. When you finally get to the second book, Titus really begins to grow as a character, and he finds himself stuck between the weight of his birthright and the need to be free of all this tradition. The war between duty and selfhood plays out against some of the most vivid gothic imagery in fantasy, and against Steerpike's increasingly monstrous ambitions. Not only are the characters here incredibly eccentric and memorable, but the castle itself is like a character, and I cannot recommend this series enough if you just want a really atmospheric gothic tale. Now, the final book, Titus Alone, this one's a little different. It's kind of controversial. It leaves the castle behind and it becomes this wandering, surreal sci-fi as Titus tries to discover who he is beyond the chains of Gormenghast, and it's very odd. The whole narrative structure kind of changes, and that is likely because of Peake's onset of dementia as he was working on this third book. So a lot of people didn't like how different the narrative became. But honestly, I kind of like the third book. It works for me. I love just the weird surrealness of that third book. I enjoyed it quite a bit. So maybe go into it just knowing that there is going to be a major shift in the series. Despite this trilogy being like a cult classic that even got its own mini-series on BBC, I still feel like not enough people know about this trilogy, and I highly recommend reading it. The way that Mervyn Peake writes is so unique. His descriptions are wonderful. They're kind of flowery, but in this really interesting way. Highly recommend the series if it sounds like something interesting to you. Switching over to a more modern, fast-paced series, the Rhyria Chronicle, or Rhyria Revelations by Michael J. Sullivan, book 1 being Theft of Swords. This is probably one of the funnest series that I've read, and at the center of it all is two of my favorite characters in fantasy, Royce and Hadrian. How can you not love these guys? They're a pair of legendary thieves for hire. Royce, a cynical assassin who who trusts no one, and Hadrian, a noble-hearted swordsman. Their banter is everything, it's fantastic, and the slow unraveling of their past is worth it alone for the recommendation. These two are the real heartbeat of the series, and honestly, I hope that one day I can write a character duo as lovable and compelling as these two. The series kicks off with a classic setup. They're hired to steal a sword, but then they end up being framed for killing the king, which, you know, is a little more complicated than their usual job. From here, things spiral into political conspiracies and ancient mysteries and ruins and the occasional prison break. It's so much fun, this series. There is a lot of familiar fantasy tropes in here, but Sullivan puts his own spin on it, and there's just this lightheartedness to this series that just makes it so charming. Even when the stakes get more serious and things get more intense, it's still just fun. If you're someone that struggles with big, dense, door-stopper fantasy books, this is a good palate cleanser. This is a great series to pick up in between some of those really dense books because it is very fast-paced and easy to get into, and that's nothing against this book. I feel like it packs a lot into this story, but it's just really easy to read, and I think that's a wonderful thing. Also, read the prequel books if you want to understand how Royce and Hadrian got to where they're at now. Now, going into this video, I knew I wanted to include a trilogy by Mark Lawrence because I've been reading a lot of Lawrence over the past couple years, and I love his library trilogy, his newest trilogy. I was gonna put that on this list, but then I thought about it for a bit, and I think my favorite trilogy by Mark Lawrence is The Red Queen's War. Starting off with The Prince of Fools, then we have, oh, that's the wrong order, then we have The Liar's Key and The Wheel of Ostheim. These books are so good. Now, this is actually set in the same world as the Broken Empire trilogy by Mark Lawrence. A lot of his series are set in the same universe. However, I would say you don't need to read Broken Empire before reading this series. You will miss out on some Easter eggs and some jokes and even some cameos, so I would recommend reading Broken Empire. I do know that Broken Empire can be a little too dark for some people. This series is a bit lighter. It still has really dark moments, don't get me wrong, but this series is a little bit lighter. I think that's why I like it more, because while it does get dark, like really dark at times, the humor kind of balances it out with this one. Still, I would recommend reading Broken Empire though. It's basically this dark character exploration of like a psychopath, Jorg, but by the end, like you really understand why he does the things he does, and I think he's one of the most complex characters that I've read, to be honest. So I'd recommend reading that, but this series is fantastic. I feel like it was a step up in my opinion, and one of the reasons that this series in particular stands out to me is the two characters, Jalan and Snorri. Jalan is one of the most entertaining characters in modern fantasy. He's a prince of Red March, 9th in line to the throne, and perfectly content to drink, gamble, run from danger, and generally avoid anything resembling heroism. He is selfish and cowardly and frequently awful, but somehow still lovable. His internal monologue is hilarious. He kind of knows that he's a horrible person and even like justifies it as he's midway through running away out of cowardice. He is such a fantastic character and he really grows on you over time. Then there's Snorri Snagason, this massive Viking with a tragic past and unshakable honor. He's basically the opposite of Jalan in every way, and the two of them are magically bound together through a curse that forces them on this journey across a post-apocalyptic fantasy Europe that's filled with undead, warlords, magical relics, and the rising threat of the dead king. Their dynamic is everything. Their banter is top tier. That's why I love this trilogy so much, and that's also why I liked the Rhyria Chronicles. I guess that's something I really enjoy, is like a good duo of characters where they're kind of opposite opposites, but they work so well together. Jalan's reluctance and cowardice, and then Snorri's like single-minded devotion. It creates some of the most memorable traveling companion chemistry that I've ever read. And say if you're a fan of the First Law series by Joe Abercrombie, I think you're gonna feel at home here because Jalan is a character that grows a lot, but it's often messy. He often backslides, and I feel like that just goes to make his character arc feel so much more satisfying in the end because it feels realistic. And again, it has a lot of humor in there to balance out the grimdark elements. So again, if you haven't read Mark Lawrence, highly recommend checking out The Red Queen's War. And next we have the Abhorsion Trilogy, or the Old Kingdom series by Garth Nix. It has both titles. This trilogy begins with Sabriel. I highly recommend reading this. Yes, it is young adult, but don't let that scare you away from reading it as an adult. I feel like this holds up very well. And yes, you could argue this isn't a trilogy anymore because over time the series has expanded. There's been a prequel, a Clariel, that was released. Then there was a fourth book, Golden Hand, which released years later. In my opinion, this is still a trilogy at heart. I feel like it had everything you needed. It wrapped up really well. We didn't need any more books set in this world, to be honest. And Golden Hand especially, I didn't really see the need for that one. I didn't engage with it too much. It was probably my least favorite Garth Nix book that I've read. And that's saying a lot because I feel like Garth Nix writes a lot of just fun, unique fantasy. Golden Hand wasn't really that great. I'm just talking about the first three books. The magic in this series is iconic. You got charter magic, which is sort of the structured, woven force of order in the universe. And then there's free magic, which is the raw, chaotic, and corrosive magic. In book one, we meet the titular character, Sabriel, who is the daughter to the Abhorsion. And the Abhorsion basically protects the world from the dead by using these magical bells to control them. They're kind of like a necromancer, but instead of raising the dead, they put the dead back to sleep. Sabriel is a young woman raised in a non-magical land that's very similar to our own, who's suddenly forced to cross this magical wall into the Old Kingdom and take up the mantle of the Abhorsion after her father goes missing. It's got this really unique vibe, this blend of like old school boarding school novel and then like dark fantasy horror mixed in there as well. There's a talking cat, which is one of the best animal companions in the entire genre, and endless amounts of undead monstrosities. I also really love the magic system with the different bells. It has high stakes. It's a very well-written young adult novel that I feel like adults can enjoy as well. That being said, it is still young adult. The character arcs might not have as much depth to them, but this manages to create such a unique atmosphere. There's really nothing like the Abhorsion novels, and I think they deserve so much more love than they get. Next we have Mistborn by Brando Sando Smitherson. This was the very first Sanderson that I've ever read, and it's still one of my favorites. It still means a lot to me. I know everybody's heard of Mistborn at this point, but just the way that Sanderson hid all these breadcrumbs throughout the trilogy and then managed to wrap up everything so perfectly at the end. There were so many surprises the first time reading Mistborn, which, by the way, I am planning some in-depth summaries for Mistborn in 2026. If you've watched my Stormlight Archive summaries, they're going to be very similar to that, where I'm pointing out all the different Cosmere Easter eggs as I go along, summarizing the books chapter by chapter. There's going to be a lot of awesome artwork and music and whatnot, so you can look forward to those. As awesome as I think Mistborn is, I do understand why some people bounce off of it. It definitely has some young adults tropes and stuff to it, especially with some of the romance plot lines. Some of the characters can feel a little melodramatic at times, and not every emotional beat lands perfectly. But honestly, even despite all of that, I feel like Mistborn does get some undeserved hate. I feel like Sanderson in general gets a lot of undeserved hate online because people just like to hate whenever something becomes popular. It becomes cool to hate on that mainstream thing. And I don't understand that. Can we just all have our own opinions? Obviously, not everybody has to love the same thing. You can have a lot of criticisms for a series and still recognize that it's good and that a lot of people are going to enjoy it. Maybe it's just not for you. But lately, I feel like I've just seen so much negativity aimed towards Sanderson online, and I don't understand. I just think it's because he's become too mainstream. If you haven't tried Mistborn at this point, this is a series I think every fantasy fan should give a read. Basically, the whole premise is, what if the Chosen One failed? What if the prophecy didn't come true and the Dark Lord won and has now been ruling the world for 1,000 years as a god emperor? That's the world we step into in this series. The final empire is blanketed in ash, the sky is red, and the night is filled with mists and monsters. It's bleak, oppressive, and honestly kind of fascinating all at the same time. The story follows Vin, a teenage street thief who discovers that she's a Mistborn, a rare type of allomancer who can burn all the magical metals instead of just one. She gets taken in by Kelsier, a charismatic rebel with a traumatic past. At first, the plot is kind of a heist novel. Kelsier is trying to pull off the impossible, topple the Lord Ruler, and overthrow an empire. But then the series kind of evolves from there, and it just becomes increasingly more epic and also philosophical, and it's just awesome. The magic system allomancy is just genius. You ingest these little bits of metal, and then you can burn them to get powers. Iron pulls, steel pushes, pewter strengthens, tin enhances your senses, and so on. It's a system that's really easy to understand, but it allows for so much creative strategy. The fight scenes in this series are some of the most fun that I've read, with characters pushing and pulling towards their enemies like they're Spider-Man, while dropping coins on the ground to launch themselves into the air. It's such a unique magic system. I also appreciate how consistent it is. Like, Sanderson is very rules-based when it comes to his magic, and while that sounds limiting, it actually forces him to be more creative. There's no hand-wavy Deus Ex Machina moments. If something happens, it's because it can happen under the rules of the world, and usually because a character was clever enough to figure it out, which really makes the payoffs feel earned. If you're looking for a trilogy with a really tight plot with lots of twists and turns, a unique magic system, and a mind-blowing conclusion to the trilogy, obviously you need to read Mistborn. And then, of course, I gotta give it to the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. Robin Hobb deserves all of the respect. This is the start of something truly magical. This is the start of her Realm of the Elderlings. After this trilogy, we got the live ship Traders, which I'm actually reading right now, so it might have made this top 10 if I had finished reading it, but there's nothing quite like the Farseer trilogy. Fitz Chivalry is a character that I have related to so much. I have lived in this character's head. He's one of the few characters where I felt so attached to this character as I'm reading from his perspective than any other series that I've read. I feel like this main trilogy is kind of a character study. Now, keep in mind, it's not exactly a pleasant study at times. You're going to go through a lot of trauma with Fitz. Robin Hobb loves to traumatize him, and it's awful, but I love it at the same time. Poor Fitz. Yeah, if you haven't read the Farseer trilogy, I think everyone should give it a chance. I know it's not going to work for everyone. It's a little slower paced. It's not as action heavy. It's much more thoughtful. And the first book, I kind of let me down the first time I read it. I didn't really know what I was getting into, and it had assassin in the title, Assassin's Apprentice. I thought this was going to be like the Night Angel trilogy, which was what I thought of as assassin fantasy at the time. And this isn't like that, okay? This is much more a coming-of-age character study, like I said. Once I kind of got past my expectations for this one, and I continued on with the series, I really grew attached to this character, and there's just a special place in my heart for Robin Hobb's writing. There's something that's really comforting about her writing. I would say my favorite one in this series, I think I would say, is Royal Assassin. Assassin's Quest has a lot of great moments as well. It's hard to pick a favorite. The Farseer trilogy takes place in the Kingdom of the Six Duchies, which is on the brink of civil war when the news breaks that the Crown Prince has fathered a bastard son. The child's name is Fitzchivalry, and he's kind of despised by everyone around him. Raised in the castle stables, only the company of the King's Fool, the ragged children of the lower city, and his unusual affinity with animals provide Fitz with any comfort. To make this royal bastard useful to the crown, Fitz is trained to be an assassin and to use the traditional magic of the Farseer family, but his tutor, allied to another political faction, is determined to discredit and even try to kill him. Fitz must survive, for he may be destined to save the kingdom. Fitz is constantly manipulated by the people around him and the politics around him, and she does something really great in her writing where you kind of know, like, you know more than Fitz, and there's moments where you wish he knew what's coming, but he doesn't, and you feel so much dread that this is about to happen to him. And it just adds a lot of suspense to her writing. Let me know your favorite trilogy by Robin Hobb. I really need to continue on with the Realm of the Elderlings. I feel like I've been saying that for years now. I have been saying that for years now. The Red Rising trilogy. Now, yes, Red Rising is both a, saga, but it also is a trilogy. The first 3 books make up the first trilogy, then there's a little bit of a time jump before we start the next books. There's now 6 books that I've released in total, with a 7th book, Red God, being planned to release in 2026. Now, the first 3 books here, these are the only ones that I've read. I haven't read the next 3 yet. I kind of came into this series a little bit later, but I am glad that I did. This first trilogy has some of my favorite moments I have ever read, and I really think this is such a great, action-packed story. I don't know how Pierce Brown makes these books so relentless. There is so much happening at all times. It's impossible to be bored. Now, little side note, but I was actually working on some in-depth summaries for Red Rising, but then Daniel Green put out his summary, so I'm probably gonna just wait a little bit before I make mine, but that is still coming. I do want to make some in-depth summaries for this first trilogy. Red Rising, if you haven't read this one, you really need to give it a try. This is kind of a mix of sci-fi and fantasy. A lot of people compare this first book to The Hunger Games, and yeah, it does kind of have a setup like that, like a battle royale. But as soon as you finish this one, you need to continue because the series really opens up. Golden Sun became, I think, my favorite out of this trilogy. This becomes like an epic space opera, but it never gives up that relentless momentum that Pierce Brown writes with, where a lot of sci-fi space operas can really get bogged down with, tons of world building and scientific details and everything. This series manages to have a believable sci-fi setting and deliver a lot of awesome world building while still keeping up that momentum, still having this very fast pace to it. And I'm not saying that a fast pace is everything. I love the Farseer trilogy. I love a nice slow burn. If you have read the next 3 after this, let me know if I should bump them up on my TBR. I probably should, but if you give me more of a push in the comments, then I probably will sooner. Now listen, you have to be realistic about these things, and there is no way that I wasn't going to include the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. This still remains one of my favorite trilogies of all time. Have I recommended it a lot on the channel? Yes, and I'm probably going to continue to, because I like to talk about my favorite books. Joe Abercrombie completely changed how I thought of grimdark fantasy. I was never really interested in reading about a lot of nihilistic themes and depressing stories. But then I read the First Law trilogy, and he made me fall in love with grimdark. I realized there's so much more to this subgenre. I have read so many since then, but Joe Abercrombie still does it best. Well, and Mark Lawrence, they're both kind of favorites for me when it comes to grimdark, but Joe adds his own flair of humor and introduces some of the most iconic fantasy characters in the First Law trilogy. Seriously, I still think about these characters all the time. Logan Ninefingers, this barbarian with a really bloody past who just kind of wants to retire. He doesn't want to be dragged into violence again and again, but there's really no escape from it. He keeps being pulled back into this violent life, despite trying hard to not be drawn into that. From like the first chapter where Logan is literally hanging off the edge of a cliff, I knew that this was going to be a really great action-packed fantasy, but I didn't realize how attached I was going to become to these characters, and Logan is just so good. There's this kind of shadow that follows him, and he also has this ability to talk to these nature spirits. I won't get into all of that, but there's a lot of depth to him that I love. Then we're introduced also to Glokta, Sandan Glokta, and he, I thought, was gonna be a villain. He's a crippled torturer, he's an inquisitor, and he's not a character I expected to become one of my favorites, but he did, and there's a place in my heart for Glokta. Giselle is that kind of pompous, full of himself character. Kind of reminded me a bit of Jalan from the Red Queen's War, and he's a character also that grew on me over time. And then of course there's Bayaz, the first of the Magi, another really great character, kind of this unique spin on the like old mentor wizard, kind of a spin on Gandalf. Now, as always, I still get a lot of comments from people that haven't even heard of First Law, so I do want to put in the warning with this trilogy. First of all, it is very dark, like this is grimdark that you're getting into, but I want to put in the warning that the first book, it doesn't have a whole lot of plots. At least it doesn't have like a main driving force behind it. I feel like the characters have their own individual plots. There's just not this big main plot that drives everything forward. And if you are a plot first kind of reader, that's gonna feel kind of weird. This is definitely more so a character study. It introduces you to all the characters. Then the real plot begins in book 2. So just keep that in mind if you're getting into this series for the first time. Now, not only is the First Law trilogy one of my favorites, but it then has some incredible standalone novels after this, and then a sequel trilogy, The Age of Madness, which is right up there with it. I feel like the first trilogy has the most iconic characters. The second trilogy, Age of Madness, I feel like has the superior story and plot, and you can also tell that Abercrombie has really grown as a writer. He's improved his technical craft of writing, so I highly recommend just reading them all. Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams. One of the best series I have ever read. And I know what you're thinking. This is 4 books. This is technically a trilogy. The last two books, it's just one book. It's called Two Green Angel Tower, Part 1 and Part 2. The book was just so gigantic, they had to split it into two novels, but it is a trilogy. I'm not sure why, though, they changed the design of the last two, so they don't exactly match up with the previous ones. Why do they do that? Why can't we just keep some consistency on the shelf? It all starts with the Dragonbone chair, and there's a special place in my heart for this book. Seriously, like, after reading this series, you can really see how influential this series was for all the other fantasy books to come. George R.R. Martin famously says that he was heavily inspired by these books to write A Song of Ice and Fire, and you can see that. But at the same time, this is not A Song of Ice and Fire. This is very different. Dare I say I like it better? I don't know. I I don't know. To keep it short, this takes place in the land of Austin Ard. There is a dying king, and as that king dies, the Storm King, the undead ruler of this elf-like race, takes the opportunity to regain his lost realm through a pact with the newly announced king. And basically we follow through the eyes of a young kitchen boy named Simon. And Simon quickly gets wrapped up into this war that's going to change the world. And there is so much adventure to this series. Just reading this first book, it just gave me that sense of adventure that I used to get reading fantasy when I was, you know, back in my tweens or teens. And just the way that Tad Williams connects you to the Hayholt in the beginning of this book through Simon's eyes. It's a very cozy beginning, and then he just rips you out of it and throws you into the wilderness to explore Austin Ard, forcing you to discover this world through the eyes of Simon. It's one of the best examples of like a coming of age story, and it's beautiful. It's beautifully written. It does take its time at the beginning, but I enjoyed how cozy that beginning was. I'm not going to go into too much detail here because I think you just need to read this one, but I will say one thing. Sticking the landing is without a doubt one of Tad Williams' greatest strengths. The ending to this series was just so satisfying. Now, there is a follow-up, like 4-book series called The Lost King of Austin Ard, or The Last King of Austin Ard. I've heard that that series is actually very good, some of Tad Williams' best. I haven't read that yet, so I need to get to that at some point. If you love beautiful writing, if you want to see a series that influenced a lot of other modern fantasy, if you want to just go on a grand adventure, then I would highly recommend reading Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. And that is why Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn is my #1 favorite trilogy of all time. You thought I was done? You thought I finished the video with #1. What about #0? The Lord of the Rings, baby. Okay, listen, I understand that top 10s can kind of get predictable when they always end with The Lord of the Rings. So I may have found a loophole when I realized that 0 is a thing. Or is it even a thing? It's the absence of a quantity. Yes, The Lord of the Rings was meant to be one big adventure. It was meant to be a singular book. But in my eyes, it is still a trilogy. It is the trilogy. And I think it still holds up incredibly well. I hear people argue that everyone just praises The Lord of the Rings because they want to honor the series that really helped boost fantasy as a genre. That's not the only reason I recommend The Lord of the Rings. It's still just as good as it's ever been. The prose, the world building without this massive info dumping, the characters, the essence of good versus evil. There's so much to enjoy. While the Fellowship of the Ring has kind of a slow beginning in the Shire, one of the coziest, most memorable beginnings in my opinion, but it gets better and better, and by the time you get to the Gates of Moria, that is one of the most memorable atmospheric moments that I've read. It still holds up, guys. And it's not just book 1 either. The Two Towers and the Return of the King. It just keeps getting better and better. And overall, there's just this incredible, powerful sense of wonder that not many series can capture. Tolkien also kind of promotes a worldview of hope and goodness and idealism. And that's not exactly something you see in a lot of modern fantasy. The profound understanding of language and mythology that Tolkien had, it just makes this series so rich and complex, and there's really nothing else like it. Like, nobody's really quite done it like J.R.R. Tolkien. There's something very special about The Lord of the Rings. It's always going to be one of my favorites. And if you don't like that I included it in another top 10, I don't care. This is my list, and The Lord of the Rings is still incredible. It still deserves a spot here. And yes, why is it number 0? It's because it's kind of above everything. It's transcended the top 10. And there we have my top 10 trilogies as of 2025. As always, let me know your favorite trilogies in the comments, because if there's any that I didn't include on this list that I need to read right away, please let me know. I actually get a lot of my recommendations from the comments, so I would love to hear from you guys. As always, a massive thank you to all my patrons and my channel members. You guys help me be able to make these videos, and I appreciate it so much. A special thank you to my top tier patrons, Mike Baker and Josh. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you soon.